This is Radio Ukraine International with the weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Doing Business covers current economic developments in and concerning Ukraine and gives topical information as well as immediate and longer-term economic forecasts. It is what we think might give you food for thought and help you see Ukraine through the economic angle. And we continue the series of our programs about Babyn Yar 80th anniversary and the Memorial Center project. On September from 29 to 30, 1941, almost 34,000 Kyiv Jews were shot in Babyn Yar. Babyn Yar has become a terrible symbol of the Holocaust in Eastern Europe. It is almost the largest single mass grave of the Second World War. From 1941 to 1943, the Nazis shot 70 to 100,000 people in Babyn Yar in Kyiv. They killed almost the entire Jewish population of the city. As a reminder, on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the tragedy, Babyn Yar hosts commemorative events designed to honor the memory of all the victims. And the floor was taken by Ruslan Kavatsuk.
My name is Ruslan Kavatsuk. I'm Deputy CEO, Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. I will be moderating this meeting, and I will speak in Ukrainian. We will have a translation.
Dear colleagues, it is anniversary of the tragedy of Babyn Yar. It is marked by the Supervisory Board of the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. Last year, one of the members of the Supervisory Board, Ronald Lauda, was in Kyiv, and in the presence of President Wladimir Zelensky, we signed a memorandum on cooperation with the Ministry of Culture, and today we see the tangible results in Babyn Yar. As you see in our Supervisory Board, we have a number of other reputable, well-known Ukrainian and international leaders, Joschka Fischer, Vice Chancellor of Germany, Svetlana Alexievich, Nobel laureate in literature, Irina Bokova, former Secretary General of UNESCO, John Lieberman, American Senator, Leonid Kravchuk, the first President of Ukraine. The team developed and presented in early this year a unique artistic concept that is based on the following approach. And there is nothing to remind there that that's the largest mass shooting place of the World War II and the largest mass grave of the World War II that is located there. At the moment, the Academic Council is headed by Father Desbois, the well-known researcher of Holocaust by bullets in Eastern Europe. The artistic concept was developed by the team of people headed by Mr. Krzyżanowski. That was done last year. At the moment, we are working to implement it. Following Forum Ukraine 30, when the President and our team presented this concept and project to large public, and we are going to have a series of museums. The founders of the foundation got together in 2016. They set up the Memorial Center, Babyn Yar. Let me introduce those who are present here. Natan Sharansky, head of the Supervisory Board, a dissident, political prisoner of the Soviet times, fighter for human rights, Minister, Vice Prime Minister of Israeli government, head of Jewish agency. Mikhail Fridman, member of the Supervisory Board, international businessman, a philanthropist, co-founder and head of the Supervisory Board of Alpha Group, and as well as co-founder for many other initiatives. German Han, member of the Supervisory Board, businessman, philanthropist, co-founder and CEO of Alpha Group. Viktor Pinchuk, member of the Supervisory Board, co-founder of the foundation, businessman, philanthropist, East One founder, Viktor Pinchuk Foundation. We also have in this room Yaakov Bleich, Chief Rabbi of Ukraine and Kiev, and Wladimir Klitschko, Ukrainian athlete, world champion boxer, social activist, philanthropist, and Aleksandr Kwasniewski, politician, president of Poland, the head of the Supervisory Board, Yalta European Strategy.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. And we continue the series of our programs about Babyn Yar 80th anniversary and the Memorial Center project. The first phase of the Babyn Yar Memorial was launched on October 6. The world-famous conceptual artist Maryna Abramovych presented a new memorial object, Crystal Wall of Crying. Within 6 months, the first museum space, Kurgan, is about to be unveiled. This was announced by members of the Supervisory Board of the organization, summing up the results of the 5-year work of the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. The participants of the press conference also noted that the work on the memorialization of the place of mass killing of thousands of people is being held in full synergy and cooperation with the state for the first time in 80 years.
Let me give the floor to the head of the Supervisory Board, Natan Sharansky.
And since my early years, I understood very well that Babyn Yar was something secret, it was something terrible, but no one was supposed to speak about that. And of course, Babyn Yar is the biggest grave that we have in Europe after Holocaust. It's a mass grave. And for the biggest mass grave, the most terrible tragedy, the massacre that took place here on the 29th and 30th of September, very little was known about that, even until today. When we started working on it, only 10% of the names of the people who were massacred there were known, although they were here in the archives, but nobody worked on that. Why did that happen? Because it's not only the symbol of that biggest massacre during the Holocaust, but at the same time, Babyn Yar was also a symbol of terrible efforts by the Soviet Union to erase the Holocaust memory. Physical efforts when they tried to turn Babyn Yar into a stadium, into a watershed, into a park, and their efforts to ban, today we'll hear Shostakovich Symphony with Yevtushenko's poems. We understand how symbolic it is. The poem and the symphony were banned under the Soviet regime. Those two things, on the one hand, a huge crime, and on the other hand, 30 years of systematic efforts to destroy that monument have resulted in the fact that so little is known about that. So when 5 years ago, the mayor of Kiev came to me, together with some very respected philanthropists that I had known because of many other Jewish projects all over the world in which they had worked, I realized that this time it was a very serious attempt. And we did not only just create a serious international team because we understand that we'll have to fight for this project, but we had a very ambitious goal. This is a place that must become the main center for studies of Holocaust in Eastern Europe. That's very important for the world because, as it has been said many times, anti-Semitism starts with Jews, but it does not end up with Jews. That's why the lessons of Holocaust should be learned by everyone. Thank you, Natan. Mikhail Fridman, please. Well, I'll try to be brief. I was born in Ukraine, in Lviv. I grew up there. My parents, both of them, were born in 1940. In 1941, it so happened that both families, both grandmothers, found themselves in Kiev, and luckily they managed to flee, to leave the city in one of the last days before the Nazis took the city, and therefore my parents survived. One of my grandfathers died in the war, was killed, another one was wounded. All of my grandmothers, grandfathers, all of them died during the Holocaust. They had lived in different towns and places, and there are no graves of them, so we do not even know how they perished. I heard about Babyn Yar for the first time from my grandmother. What Natan is just saying, of course, we all, especially in the Jewish community, people knew that that had happened for many years, for many decades. It was a taboo. Nobody talked about it. The changing point in the history of Babyn Yar was Yevtushenko's poem. It was not only, an attempt to fight the Soviet ideology, a challenge to it, but that was the first time, the first instance of a kind of a civic protest against the oblivion of the victims. And my grandmother told me that people felt that they had to fight so that the place would not turn into, as they say, stadium or different plans were there for something to be built there. So when that situation occurred, as Natan is saying, when that initiative came from Kiev mayor, there were no more questions for me. We do a lot of philanthropic work, of charity, Jewish charity. I think that's an honor for me. That's something that I do to commemorate my family members, my ancestors, my friends. And I think that this is a very important thing for Ukraine, for the Jewish community, for the international Jewish community, not only for the Ukrainian one, because I do believe that without looking into the eyes of the past, it's impossible to build a good future and a prosperous country. This is why I believe that this is a great honor and responsibility for me to participate in this project.
Next in line was German Han, who is the deputy chairman of the board.
Well, with me, everything is simple. I was born in Kiev. I grew up in Kiev, not far from here, in Yevbaz, if anyone knows such a place in Kiev. And just like Mikhail's parents, my parents also left with their families before Kiev was occupied, and they came back after the war. Some of my family members, they fought in the war, and I knew since the early years about the Babyn Yar tragedy. My parents told me about that. Moreover, once a person who lived next door and came to us, and it so happened that my parents knew him, were friends with him, he had often visited us, and it turned out that he was one of the survivors of the Babyn Yar tragedy. Well, not the massacre, but he was arrested in 1942, and he found himself in the camp that was at the place of the massacre, and he participated in digging up and burning the corpses, in destroying the evidence of it. He participated in an escape attempt. There was a novel that described these events. He was a witness at many processes, trials in Germany. And he would sometimes tell me some stories about how they escaped, He was in the team that would take away golden teeth from the corpses. That's why he would never wear any golden things, although he was quite a well-off man. And that's why when I heard that there was such a project, and when I was invited to start thinking about that, of course I was very happy with a feeling of responsibility. I agreed. I also believe that this is an honor for me to participate in commemorating the memory, commemorating the victims. And I think that one of the most important goals of this project is to tell the real truth. and try to affect the growing generation. So in the future, such tragedies would never take place. There would be no place for them, no room for them, and of course tolerance and equal treatment of people of different origins, and evaluating people only by their real deeds is the objective that we all have here. Thank you very much. Thank you. Victor Pinchuk, please. For me, just like for my friends, this is a very personal project. I was born in Kiev, and my mother and my father, they were also born in Kiev, and my grandfathers and grandmothers, they all lived here before the war. In July of 1941, the families, my mother and my father, they managed to leave Kiev, and that's why they survived. When they came back, their family members, their friends, people who lived next door, they knew that they were already in Babyn Yar. You know, even today, for my parents, this is a story that is very much alive. It's a painful story. 3 days ago, I came to see my mother and my father to tell them about the ceremony we're going to have tonight. I even thought maybe, I even suggested maybe you would go there, maybe you would see it. And my mother started talking about that, and I saw tears in her eyes. She said, "Victor, I really would like to go, but I cannot do that. It's all again in front of my eyes." She was 8 years old when they came back to Kiev in 1944, and she said, we saw how many people still knew about that. They lived in Volodymyrska Street, and she said, I remember that woman, a young Jewish woman who had gone crazy because she walked around with the boots of her child. She walked around and she said, she's there. But that's what my mother said 3 days ago. This is still a very much painful story for my parents, as well as for many hundreds of thousands or millions of people of that generation. I learned about all of that from my parents, of course, and I have always felt that we have to do something to tell that story. Well, I tried to do whatever I could. I produced a documentary about the Holocaust in Ukraine. We made some exhibits with Patrick Desbois, Holocaust by Bullets in New York and Kiev and Dnipro. But when I would come to Babyn Yar with my friends or with my guests, foreigners, I always felt that we have to do something there. But I always thought it was something that could not be done. And only in 2015, when we started discussing it, I also felt that could be real. That was 5 years ago. And perhaps with the presence of some of you, we declared that we now had a commitment that we want to build a memorial. I think it's very important. I have a feeling of this colossal responsibility. We don't have the right to make a mistake. A huge team is working on it, of young, talented Ukrainians. And we also have the leading world experts, perhaps all the best experts who study Holocaust, the great international artists, sculptors, architects. It's a huge, wonderful team. All of them understand how responsible they are for telling the truth. When this truth has been told by all of us, of course it would be a very important statement. Ukraine will make a very powerful statement saying that we are a modern, healthy nation, and we will be one of the most successful European nations. That's very important, a precondition for Ukraine's successful future.
The next speaker was Rabbi Yaakov Dov Bleich, Chief Rabbi of Kiev and Ukraine.
First of all, the question that people are asking, we're starting in 2015 or 2020, 2021 to develop a center. We lost 80 years. We actually lost 50 years of Soviet rule when these things were not allowed to be spoken about. But I think that we have to look at the plus. We have a chance now to do something that will not repeat other existing museums, make something unique, make something that will put Ukraine on the map and to an extent, will force other Holocaust museums throughout the world and other museums in Ukraine to rethink and to bring it up to more what's needed mostly. We lost a generation, I think, that didn't learn and hear about the Holocaust because those that were born in the 40s, 50s, and even 60s understood it. The 90s, 2000s will get it. But the 70s and 80s, because of the Soviet system, we were not able to, and they may not ever learn about what happened. But it's no reason for us to lose the next generations and the future. Also today, for the first time ever, the perpetrators, and today for the first time, 159 names of murderers that murdered people in Babyn Yar are being published by the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. And of course, not to forget about the righteous and those that risked their lives to save Jews during World War II and put their lives in danger for that. So that's the greatest thing that I find living here for over 30 years already. I think this is one of the greatest honors and at the same time challenges that I've been able to participate in the Supervisory Board of the Babyn Yar Holocaust Memorial Center. And I'm looking forward to it developing more and bringing more information and becoming the primary source for information, not only for Kiev and Ukraine, but for the entire world about what took place in Babyn Yar.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. And here's our exclusive interview with Ukrainian athlete, multiply world boxing champion, public figure Wladimir Klitschko. Radio Ukraine International, can you tell me please about the importance of such events for the Ukrainian public, please?
It is crucially important to give the memory to all the fallen in this tragedy that took place in September 1941. But it's as well not just a local project, it's a global impact. And we cannot repeat the mistakes of the history if we don't study the history. So I'm very happy. It's not just happy. It's important to have research center and to find more what was happening, which is going on right now. What's happening in Babyn Yar, to find eventually all the names of the fallen. To follow up with the other tragedies as Babyn Yar were happening all around Europe in the Second World War and with invasion of Nazis. And this memorial, one more time, it's extremely important, not just for the city of Kyiv or Ukraine, but it's definitely having a global impact.
You're listening to Radio Ukraine's weekly program, Doing Business. Patrick Desbois, who is the head of the Academic Council of Babyn Yar, Roman Catholic priest, also kindly answered our questions. There are a lot of information about Jewish population that was killed during Babyn Yar, but what could you say about the victims of non-Jewish population?
It's simple and complicated. First, the investigations are not finished. There are a lot of things we don't know about Babyn Yar, because it's a big shooting. During 2 days, it was apparently only Jews, so 33,000 the number. And after, 2 times per week, more or less, it was anybody. It could be gypsy, it could be partisan, it could be Christian, communist. That is not well documented because we have to work on it. And for the moment, we have centralized, me and my committee, we have centralized our investigation for the 2 days because it was already not clear.
Next program, we continue our talk with Father Patrick Desbois and will get in touch with Andrei Umansky, a deputy head of the Babyn Yar Academic Council. That was Radio Ukraine's weekly program Doing Business, hosted by Rodion Zhiznievsky and produced by Konstantin Lavrentyuk. Tune in every Wednesday for more.